Hello biology students, today we're going to be jumping into evolution by natural selection. Most of us know and have heard of the theory of natural selection, but maybe we've only heard it called evolution. And what we really need to know going into this set of notes, that biology in the FCPS POS requires that we talk about evolution and that it is part of our curriculum. Not only that, most scientists would say that we can't make sense of other things like ecology, genetics, etc. unless we understand the basics of this. So we're not going to talk about this via argument or controversy whatsoever in class. If you at all want to do that, you are welcome to contact Ms. Clausen on the side, but for the most part, we're going to stay focused and mature and learn about what is the background of this theory and why we call it a theory anyways. All right, let's jump in. So before we talk about it too far, let's remember what a theory really meant. And so to practice, we're going to look at this multiple choice question. And in your notes, all you're going to want to do is write the question a theory is and write the actual correct answer. This has been a most missed on previous tests and quizzes, so make sure you're going to really know it by now. What do you think the correct answer is? It was A. So make sure you jot that down as the correct definition in your notes. A scientific theory is a well-tested explanation that unifies a broad range of observations. Remember, we've talked about cell theory, germ theory, gravitational theory. These are things that scientists are not thinking is a maybe. They're almost thought of to be like laws. So we don't really question them until there's evidence that somehow rejects them. And we are always looking for more and more evidence. So we don't think about it as like a controversial belief or non-belief. A theory is something that we use to explain multiple other things until there's evidence to somehow say otherwise. Let's jump in. So when we're thinking about theory in this part of the year, we're mostly going to be thinking about the theory of an evolution by natural selection. Let's start with this first part. What is evolution? Well, evolution is not something that was coined by this old dude called Charles Darwin. Evolution has been something that's been talked about for forever. It just means change over time. It's a very general phrase. Cars have changed over time. The way our cell phones look has changed over time. This is a bigger idea than when we're just thinking about biology. So when we're talking about biology evolution, we're actually talking about natural selection, and that's something new for us. So the theory of natural selection is the process of how evolution occurs for living things, and that is what Charles Darwin coined. And he coined it after he did a lot of trips in his boat looking at the Galapagos Islands, because those islands had so many cool and diverse creatures. In class, the goal is for you to try to look at some of his information, maybe some videos, maybe some activities, so you can see what he saw and why he came about these things. So what we'll see next is that Darwin's observation really led him to think that organisms are changing over time, and he had a couple requirements for that to really be a possibility. And the first requirement was that in a population there is variation. And what do I mean by that? Well, we have learned genetics, and we know that not everybody is exactly the same in a population. The human population is 99% the same, but we have small differences, our hair color, our eye color, etc. This is true for all organisms that are the same species. They might have some slightly different colors to their shells, or some might be bigger than others, and those differences might make them more or less likely to survive, depending on what environment they are in. Whether it's a sandy or muddy environment, those differences in the color of the environment might affect which colors are better off to survive. The other thing he realized is that most organisms are making a lot more babies or offspring than they really need to. So especially organisms that have a high risk of possibly not having the baby survive, they'll make thousands of babies, like a frog. And even a bunny or a squirrel will make tons of babies. That overproduction of offspring is hugely important. The next thing he noticed was that there's a struggle for existence, meaning there's competition within a population. For instance, the reason why peacock males are so beautiful, and yes, those are the dude birds, is because they're competing with the other male birds to try to win over a female. That's competition to be able to win in the case of life, which is being able to survive to make offspring. In the case of plants, they're all trying to grow really tall so they can get the most sunlight. So they make lots of babies, but not all of them can survive. If we think back to this example, is there going to be enough food or oxygen for all of those frog babies? No. Those frog babies are not going to all be able to survive in the environment. And that's why there's all of these kind of struggles, and we think about some of these guys are better off because of their traits, and we call that the survival of the fittest, which doesn't necessarily mean the most strong will survive, but fittest means that the organisms that have the best genetic traits or adaptations will survive. So in the previous examples, the frogs that probably can deal with the least amount of food and deal with low oxygen are going to survive better. The trees that grow faster will do better because they'll get more of the sunlight for photosynthesis. And the peacocks that have the more beautiful feathers will get more mates to be able to reproduce. And in this example, which kind of reminds us of our snail shells in the first slide, this shows that it's not strength that allows these different mice to survive. It's their trait of fur color. So in this dark environment, the better fur color is the darker colored fur. They're the fittest. They'll survive because what? They're camouflaged. And the predator, which is in this case the limiting factor, will not eat them, versus the less fit white mice are going to not survive. All right, and survival is really important because really we want to be able to pass our genes on to our offspring. So in this summary, organisms with the most favorable genetic traits in an environment, they'll survive, they'll reproduce, and they'll pass on the traits, and that'll become more and more frequent in the population. All right. Last but not least, we're going to have our example. That's a really cool real-life example of antibiotic resistance. So this is really interesting because we're all the time putting antibacterial soap or Purell on our hands. But one of the things that's curious is that what happens to the bacteria on our hands when we do that. So once in a while, one of those bacteria will have a random typo or mutation while they do DNA replication. All right, and that will cause a mutation. Once in a while, that mutation might allow for the bacteria to be resistant just by chance to whatever antibacterial soap or antibiotics that we're using. All right, in this case, the predator instead of a bird is kind of our antibiotics, right? And we are killing off all of the ones that are non-resistant, and the ones we're selecting for are the resistant ones. So which ones are most fit in this scenario where we're adding antibiotics to the bacteria? It's the ones that somehow got a random mutation just by chance. And those resistant bacteria, they're going to be more fit, and they'll survive, and they'll be able to reproduce. This is something that's actually in the news very often because a lot of times people don't use their antibiotics well. You have to make sure you kill off all the possible bacteria by taking your full load of antibiotics. So if you are asked to take it for 7 to 10 days, you need to take it for 7 to 10 days, because if you leave behind 1 or 2 guys and they are a little bit resistant, then they're going to reproduce and you're going to get sick again, and then that antibiotic might not even work. So antibiotic resistance, we're going to practice this more in class, but it is a really strong example that we use nature and we're selecting for what is the most fit thing, whether it's a predator or an antibiotic. That is how the change over time occurs in a population. Natural selection. Good job, guys.